Doctors Association for Relief and Education. Their talks. Transforming ideas into reality.
And now I would like to call upon the chairperson for today's talks, Dr. Abdul Khaliq sir, consultant gastroenterologist, health in clinic. And I'll also like to invite Dr. Atif Ismail, Associate Professor, Department of Emergency Medicine, NIMS, and President, City Chapter of DARE. We'll have 4 talks for today. We'll begin with the talk of Dr. Abdul Aziz, Consultant Interventional Radiologist, AIG AIG Gachibowli, on the topic of interventional radiology.
I'm consultant interventional radiologist at AIG Hospital, Gachibowli, and today I'll be this topic. When they told me to give about interventional radiology, I thought I would like to bring some interest among the other faculties, doctors of other faculties, the introduction to the radiology, to bring in some interest and what can be done and what all is being done in the interventional radiology. So what is interventional radiology? It is basically a subspecialty, or I would rather call it a super specialty, in which we do a lot of minimally invasive procedures which are diagnostic as well as therapeutic. And why interventional? Why radiology? Because all the procedures are being done under continuous image guidance. So we do a lot of image guided procedures for diagnosis, like we do a lot of biopsies, day in and day out, a lot of lesion biopsies, parenchymal biopsies, thyroid and lung and liver and kidney and all sorts of biopsies. And then what are the therapeutic things that we can do? We do a lot of drainage procedures, drainages of abscesses, collections, Waldorf necrosis in pancreatitis, and then we do a lot of percutaneous biliary as well as vascular procedures. So and also the horizons or the scope of the interventional radiology has been increasing manifold in the last few years. We also do a lot of direct treatments like catheter based medicine delivery, and device placement such as chemoports, PICC lines, and a lot of angioplasties and embolizations and thrombectomies wherever and whenever indicated. So these are just the procedures. I will not go into all of them, because I would like to show you some of the interesting cases that we do on a daily basis. So what are the advantages of IR? IR is basically a very minimally invasive approach. We don't ever cut open the patient. We are always, we enter the patient through a needle. That's how much, that is the approach that we go, or that is the amount of the puncture that we do for the patient. It is less expensive because the hospitalization stay, the comorbidity associated with the surgical procedure all comes down manifold. And it is less painful. Most of our procedures are done under local anesthesia. Very few we require conscious sedation if the patient is uncooperative or for the big procedures. So it is relatively better, safer and more effective, and there is real-time visualization of the imaging that we have. And so all of this sums up with reduced procedure related morbidity and mortality. So this is my first case. This gentleman was around a 35-year-old male patient, and he was diagnosed with pancreatitis. And this was the Waldorf necrosis that he developed in the lesser sac. You can see this collection was about approximately 12 into 8 centimeters. We went ahead and we drained this collection with a Maligott catheter, and this was 1 month after the procedure. His collection had completely dried off. So if this patient had underwent surgical necrosectomy, he would have maybe had an ICU stay for about 1 week, but he never went to the ICU, and he was discharged without an ICU stay. So this is a 55-year-old female patient. She had a left upper lobe lesion which sort of looked like hematoma, but the pulmonologist insisted that there was increase in the size of the hematoma. It was technically it was difficult because it was a very small lesion, about 9 mm, And posterior, we didn't do the posterior approach because posteriorly there was a fissure. So when you do CT guided lung biopsies, you are not supposed to cross the fissures. So we went ahead and we did the biopsy. It came out to be pulmonary hematoma. This was another case, around 60-year-old male patient, and he had a consolidation in the right upper lobe, a soft tissue density SOL basically, and he was suspected to have malignancy. We went ahead and we did the CT guided biopsy, and you can see the needle tip well within the lesion, and this turned out to be a granulomatous lesion, and it was they started hemorrhaging. This was another 60-year-old male patient. He was complaining of lower backache, persistent lower backache for many months. So on MRI images, there was spondylodiscitis at the level of L5S1. You can see the disease vertebrae, spondylodiscitis. These are the sagittal images, and this is the axial images. I hope you can see my cursor. So we went ahead and we did the bone biopsy. So what we do is, with the bone biopsy needle, we first drill the bone. We do the transpedicular approach. Once after we have drilled the bone, we go inside and then we take the bony pieces and for the analysis. And this turned out to be tuberculosis too. So this gentleman, he was 55-year-old male patient, and he had a history of tuberculosis 20 years back, and he had a lot of episodes of hemopsis for the past 6 months. And as you can see, his right lung was very diseased. There are multiple cystic cavitatory lesions you can see here. We got CT angio done for him, and CT angio showed. So basically the idea is bronchial artery size should not be more than 3 mm. So these arteries were really hypertrophied. This was one of the bronchial artery, and these were other bronchial arteries. So we planned for bronchial artery embolization. So we did DSA for this patient. You can see this is bronchial artery, and these are all the hypertrophied vessels which look very diseased, and this was the reason that he was having a lot of hemopsis. So we went ahead and we embolized this artery, and post-embolization you can see, this is the post-embolization image. None of the diseased arteries are seen. And he had another intercostal bronchial trunk. This is the DSA prior to the embolization. You can see there are a lot of diseased arteries, all these channels, the blood that is coming. That is actually, those are the diseased arteries that were bleeding for him, causing hemopsis. So we went ahead and we did embolization again, and you can see there are no diseased vessels that are being seen now. This patient responded very well, and we've been following him up for about one year now, and he didn't have any 6 months now, and he didn't have any bleeding. So this was a 21-year-old gentleman, and I would just like to show his clinical image. So he had a bluish, swelling on his right buttock, and it was very painful for him. He could not sit. Basically, the quality of life, we might not think that it could be so bad, but he had such back pain that he could not work at all because of the pain. So we got an MRI done, and he was diagnosed to have a slow flow malformation, and he didn't have any prominent draining vein into the central system. So we planned and we went ahead and we did percutaneous sclerotherapy for him. What is percutaneous sclerotherapy? Percutaneous sclerotherapy. So what we do is, we use sclerosant, which is sodium tetradecyl sulfate, and we make a foam of it, and percutaneously we will puncture the channels, those channels, the bluish veins, and we go and give the sclerosant inside. And once the sclerosant touches the vessel wall, the endothelium, it immediately damages all the endothelium, and those all the whatever channels were there, whatever venous collaterals were there, all of them, they collapse on themselves. So we did 1 month follow-up, and the size reduced to a little extent, but clinically he was much better. As in, he didn't have there was much better pain reduction. So this was around a 41-year-old female patient. She had history of menorrhagia and dysmenorrhea. On MRI, we could see that there was a 9 into 5 centimeter fibroid was seen, intramural fibroid was there, and she didn't want to undergo myomectomy or hysterectomy. So we went ahead and we did uterine artery embolization. So this is the left uterine artery. We went inside, and you can see I'll just point my cursor towards it. You can see the blush that is there. That is the blush of the uterine fibroid. So the idea is, we go inside and we embolize those arteries that are supplying the uterine fibroid, and the fibroid, it kind of melts and it comes out like it is, you don't need to do any surgery further. Uterine artery embolization, so we went ahead and we embolized, and you can see in the second video, the blush is gone. So we also did for the right uterine artery for the same patient. Little blush was there coming, even here you can see my cursor, I go. So we went ahead and we embolized right uterine artery also. And this patient is under follow-up. We have not done yet the follow-up imaging, but the menorrhagia and dysmenorrhea is no more. So she was very happy post-procedure. So this is another case, lymphangiogram that we do. So basically this gentleman, he was around 60-year-old male patient, and he was operated elsewhere for open cholecystectomy. Post-open cholecystectomy, this gentleman started having abdominal distension and dyspnea on exertion. So and he was diagnosed to have bilateral pleural effusion and ascites. So we did the analysis for pleural effusion and triglycerides were high. So this was a case of lymphatic leak, chylous ascites and pleural effusion. So what we do in lymphangiogram is we went ahead and we cannulated one of the femoral node with the needle, and with the needle, and then we inject the contrast Lipidol. The name of the contrast is Lipidol. So we go and inside and we inject the Lipidol, and once we inject the Lipidol will start going into the lymphatics. These are the lymphatics. You can follow my cursor. So we started giving him Lipidol. After about 5 cc of Lipidol, we could see the leaks. It was at the level of L4, L5, S1 level. You can see from here suddenly the Lipidol is leaking into the peritoneum. It started leaking into the peritoneum, and that was the leak from where it was, the lymphatics, the lymph was leaking. So we went ahead and we gave glue from the node, and you can see this is the glue cast. We embolized this lymphatic or lymph leak, and you can see the glue cast was also trying to fly into the peritoneum. But this patient responded very well. These are the final images you can see within the lymphatics. This is the Lipidol. It is a contrast agent, so it gets with glue, it got accumulated within the lymphatics. And this was prior to the procedure. After tapping, he had this much of pleural effusion. But this is 3 months follow-up. He had absolutely no pleural effusion and no ascites. So my next case is BRTO. So what is BRTO? In a lot of patients with CLD, I would like just to show you this image. So in a lot of patients in CLD, what happens is the portal vein pressure increases. When the portal vein pressure increases, the blood cannot pass through the sinusoids, and it goes, and from the splenic vein, it forms some portosystemic collaterals. What portosystemic collaterals do is, they basically shunt the blood from the portal system into the systemic circulation. So one such shunt can be gastrorenal shunt. What happens when there is a gastrorenal shunt is, hello? Yeah, I hope you can see some bright spots. This is the stomach, by the way, and I hope you can see the bright spots. These are the varices that come within the submucosal part of the fundus, and the problem with these varices is when they bleed, within one episode of bleeding also they can kill the patient. A patient might die even if he has one bad episode of bleeding from such varices. So the idea behind BRT is, what we do is we cannulate his from the left or right common femoral vein. We go into his renal vein, and from the renal vein we go into the gastrorenal shunt, which is the efferent. As in, the blood from the portal circulation comes like this into the varices and goes into the renal vein. So what we do is we go inside the renal vein and then into the gastrorenal shunt, and we inflate a balloon, and then we give a sclerosant. Why sclerosant? Because sclerosant again will cause the embolization of all the varices and the collaterals. So we went ahead, this was the gastrorenal shunt and this was a bunch of varices. This patient had intermittent bleeding from them but not very bad bleeding. So we went through the right common femoral vein into the inferior vena cava, and then from inferior vena cava you can see the balloon that is here. We inflated the balloon within the gastrorenal shunt and we gave all the sclerosant inside. Usually sodium tetradecyl sulfate is given. It is mixed with the air to form a sort of a foam and it is given into the varices. So as soon as the sclerosant goes inside the varices, it gets completely obliterated. And BRTO is such an excellent procedure that for all our patients we have had 100% technical success and 97% clinical success. As in 97% of the patients that we do BRTO, they don't re-bleed from the gastric varices. So what we do is, because we are in the efferent efferent channel, once we try to deflate the balloon, the sclerosant might fall back into the renal vein. So before coming out from the gastrorenal shunt, we put embolizing coils. We put coil mass in the gastrorenal shunt so that the coil will embolize the gastrorenal shunt just before the renal vein and within the gastrorenal shunt, and the sclerosant will not reflux back into the renal vein and into the systemic circulation. So why I told you about the coil and everything is because I would like to show another interesting case. One patient we had done BRTO. So this gentleman, what we do ideally is after BRTO around 24 to 48 hours later on, we get one CECT done just to see how the varices have taken up the sclerosant. So we found out that when on the next day of the BRTO, that the coil has actually refluxed into the renal vein, and from renal vein it went into the IVC, and through IVC it went into the right atrium, and it was sitting nicely here in the right atrium. And there are studies that you can leave this coil in just like that, but there are also studies that it can cause right ventricular rupture, it can cause pulmonary embolism and a lot of other complications. So this is the CT scan. You can see the coil was within the right atrium. It was a big coil mass. So what we did was we used a 7 French introducer sheath. This is a steerable sheath introducer. So we, through the left common femoral vein, through the IVC, we placed it in the right atrium, and then we used radial jaw biopsy forceps. It is a type of biopsy forceps, I'll show you. With that, under continuous fluoroscopic and echocardiographic monitoring, we caught hold of the coil mass and we pulled it back and we got it out of the body. So this was that radial jaw biopsy forceps that we put inside the heart under continuous echocardiography, and we pulled out the coil mass. This was a 21-year-old female patient. So she had type 1 choledocalcis previously, and for that she underwent hepaticojejunostomy, and she presented to us with the history of jaundice and itching, and her liver enzymes were also elevated, AST, ALP and SG basically. So this patient on CT, as you can see, these are all the dilated biliary ducts, and on the left side image you can see it was full of sludge and calculi. So for these patients, what the procedure we do is percutaneous transhepatic biliary drainage. So what we do is from the liver, we puncture this through the skin percutaneously, we puncture the liver. You can follow my cursor, and then we'll puncture this duct, and then through this duct we will go inside and place a catheter that will drain all this bile and accumulated sludge. So this is the image. We first put a needle, we punctured the duct, and after puncturing the duct, we injected some contrast just to see the calculi. We are injecting the contrast, and you can see here these filling defects are all the calculi and sludge that was there within her biliary system. And the jejunum is supposed to be somewhere here, but she had hepaticojejunostomy stricture. There was a stricture at this level. At this level, little amount of contrast was going. So we went ahead, we placed the wire across the hepaticojejunostomy side, and we went ahead and we did balloon dilation. After doing balloon dilation, what we did is, over the wire, can you see this light colored balloon? So with this balloon, we push all the calculi down. Like we have to manually like push the balloon. It's a special balloon. It is a very sturdy balloon with which we will push all the calculi into the jejunum. So as you can see, this is the follow-up image in which there is no hepatic or jejunostomate stricture, and you can see that the contrast is freely moving across the HJ, and there are no calculi. So this is another female. She was a 30-year-old female patient. She came with complaints of abdominal distension. She had a lot of bilateral pedal edema and prominent abdominal veins were seen. I don't know if you can appreciate, but she had a prominent abdominal veins. And on ultrasound, she was diagnosed to have a Budd-Chiari syndrome, and on ultrasound you can see that the IVC is narrowed at intrahepatic level. So these are other images. You can see this is the IVC and it is completely narrowed at this point, just before the right atrium. There was stricture. So we went ahead. This is the DSA, which shows a lot of collaterals, but you cannot appreciate the actual IVC. So this was the actual IVC. We went with the catheter inside, and this was the IVC that had narrowing. So we went ahead, we crossed the stricture with the wire and did balloon dilation. Once the balloon dilation was done, you can see how the venogram is. There are no collaterals, absolutely no collaterals. This patient responded very well. This was another similar case. This gentleman was actually a radiologist. He was also diagnosed to have Budd-Chiari syndrome, and he had huge collaterals, and IVC was actually not seen. The native IVC was not seen because of the narrowing at the level of the intrahepatic IVC. We went ahead and we did balloon dilation. After balloon dilation, again there were collaterals, so we went ahead and we did stenting. You can see the stent, and you see how amazing the response was. There are no collaterals seen. So then again, this is next case. This patient was also diagnosed to have Budd-Chiari syndrome. All the hepatic veins were thrombosed for this patient, but IVC was patent, and you see a lot of collaterals you can see here. So this is basically in direct intrahepatic portosystemic shunt. What we do is, from the IVC, because there are no hepatic veins, from the IVC we will go and puncture the intrahepatic portion of the IVC. We will puncture, and we will put a needle across the liver parenchyma, and we will puncture the portal vein. And then from the IVC into the portal vein, we will place a stent. So this was the patient. You can see this left gastric vein or coronary vein supplying to the collaterals, and a lot of collaterals were there. We went ahead and we did stenting for this case. Once the dip stent was placed, all the collaterals disappear. You can see there are no collaterals at this point, and this is the stent. This is TIPS. TIPS is again done for patients with CLD who has a lot of portal hypertension, and which is causing a lot of ascites. This patient had actually hepatic hydrothorax. We had placed the right-sided ICD also. He had a lot of right-sided pleural effusion, and you can see this a bunch of portosystemic collaterals that were actually coming because of the increased portal hypertension. So we go in TIPS. What we do is, through the hepatic vein we go inside. This is the hepatic vein that I am trying to show. So we go inside the hepatic vein. From the hepatic vein we pass a needle through the hepatic vein into the parenchyma, and then we puncture the portal vein and we stent across this. So this is pre-procedure. This is portal vein, main portal vein, and these are the collaterals that were seen. Once you put the stent, all collaterals disappear, because these collaterals usually develop because of the increased portal pressure. Once you are doing this TIPS or DIPS, the portal pressure significantly reduces and all the collaterals disappear. So this gentleman, another case, 50-year-old male patient, he had a history of trauma, and he had clot evacuation done also. But on CCT image after clot evacuation, he had a AV fistula rising from a brachial artery, and it was draining in basilic vein. This is the extravasation that was seen. Okay, you can see, I hope here the extravasation was there. So we went ahead and we did glue embolization. This is one sort of embolizing agent. We put glue inside. After glue, you can see that artery was not taking up and there was no extravasation. This gentleman had cholecystectomy elsewhere. There was a huge pseudoaneurysm. This big pseudoaneurysm can rupture any time, and if it ruptures, it can cause the death of the patient maybe within 10 minutes. So we went ahead and we did again percutaneous glue embolization. We directly punctured the liver and we gave glue. Glue is a sort of embolizing agent, and it will solidify once it touches the blood, and the pseudoaneurysm was taken care of. This was another case, huge pseudoaneurysm coming from the right common hepatic artery, and again on DSA you can see this huge pseudoaneurysm. Problem with main artery pseudoaneurysms is that you cannot coil them or block them with embolizing agents, so you have to do stent grafting. So on DSA you can see here huge pseudoaneurysm is there. So we put a long sheath, and over the wire we crossed, So this was the pseudoaneurysm. Then we put a stent graft. Basically, this is a sort of a covered stent which will close the neck of the aneurysm. After putting the stent graft, you can see that the pseudoaneurysm has completely disappeared. So this was another case. This was actually a very ironic case because this gentleman never had bleeding. He came with complaints of jaundice and he had such a huge pseudoaneurysm that it was compressing his biliary system. You can see it was like around 7 centimeters of pseudoaneurysm. It was compressing the biliary tree. It was actually this big. So we went ahead and we did stent graft for this case. After stenting, you can see there is no pseudoaneurysm is not seen. This case, another pseudoaneurysm. So I have showed you blue embolizations and stent grafting. For this patient, we have done coiling. You can see there is a big, huge pseudoaneurysm right at this point. It was probably arising from LG as we thought on imaging. So we went ahead and we did. This was the angiogram, and you can see faint pseudoaneurysm being seen here. So what we do in this pseudoaneurysm is that we have to do a sandwich technique. First we go distal to the aneurysmal neck and we will coil this part distal to it, and then towards the left hand maybe you can see my cursor, and then you come proximally and you coil once again. So once we did distal coiling, we can see the pseudoaneurysm very well here. So we coiled this entire artery, and you can see after coiling there was the pseudoaneurysm has thrombosed and there is no flow into the culprit vessel. This was a 21-year-old gentleman. He had intraventricular bleed and grade 4 subarachnoid hemorrhage. He was diagnosed to have a dissecting aneurysm in the vertebral artery. We went ahead, see this is the DSA. You can see that there is a dissecting aneurysm at this point. Can you see some bulge here? That was the dissecting aneurysm. So we went ahead and we did the DSA. This was the DSA, and you can see the pseudoaneurysm here at this point. So we went ahead and put a flow diverter here. Flow diverter is also not exactly like a covered stent, but something similar to that. And once we put that flow diverter, you can see that this was the flow diverter and it was not filling. So I now have come to my last two cases. This gentleman, he was around 60-year-old male patient and he was known case of CLD and was diagnosed to have HCC. There were two lesions, one in segment 7 and one in segment 4. This is arterial phase enhancement and this is washout. So we went ahead and we did TACE. So you can see the faint blush. This was the artery supplying. What is TACE? TACE is transarterial chemoembolization. What we do in that is we go inside the artery that is supplying the cancer and we give a chemotherapy drug from inside the vessel that is supplying the artery, and that causes the necrosis of the tumor, and it has excellent result because we are not giving systemic chemotherapy. It is a very selective, super selective technique of giving the chemotherapy within the artery that is supplying the tumor. So we went ahead, this is the blush, it is faintly visualized here. So we went ahead and we give doxorubicin plus lipidol. There was another lesion, this was the supplying artery, you can see, and this was the blush. Again we went ahead and we gave him the chemotherapy, and this patient actually had complete response. You can see there is no enhancement at all. This is arterial phase and this is portal venous phase. He had absolutely no enhancement. It was completely recovered. So this is my last case for today. This gentleman, he actually had around 10 into 9 centimeter of tumor within the segment 8 of the liver. It was a huge tumor. This is the arterial enhancement you can see in axial and coronal images, and this was the venous washout. So, and they insisted on basically like a curative treatment. So we went ahead and we did transarterial radioembolization for that. Like we gave chemotherapy from the artery that was supplying the lesion, in this we will give radiotherapy. So we give yttrium 90 as an agent. So we went ahead, and this is the first image actually is the celiac angiogram. So this was the culprit artery. So we went inside the culprit artery and we gave radioembolization, that is yttrium 90. And this was the subsequent nuclear imaging. You can see how much it has it's light up, how much the tumor has taken the yttrium 90. And this gentleman, after a few days, like 3 months follow up, the tumor size has come down and there was no arterial enhancement at all, and his AFP became 0, and this gentleman actually underwent surgery later on and he was completely cured of his cancer. I would like to thank all of you for listening to my talk, and I hope I could convey my message about the interventional radiology. Thank you.